The wind tore across the East Texas prairie like it had a bone to pick with the land. Storm clouds stacked like bruised fists over the ridge, chasing the last of the sunlight into the hills. Clay Dawson stood on the edge of his wraparound porch, boots rooted to the boards, jaw tight, watching the sky boil. The scent of lightning hung in the aerozone, dust, and something raw. Inside the ranch house, there was silence. Not the kind that comforted, but the kind that echoed too loud. He had built this house with his own hands. Every nail, every stone pulled from the land where his father had died working. 60,000 acres, and not a single soul under its roof but him. Not since his brother drowned. Not since his mother left. Not since, well, long enough that even the echoes had grown quiet. Now his milker had quit. Old George, loyal for 15 years, had packed up when his mother back in Arkansas fell ill. Clay couldn't blame him. Family was family. But it left him in a bind. 12 Holsteins in the barn didn't care about grief or schedule changes. They needed milking twice a day. No excuses. So Clay did what any rancher would do. He posted a job. Short notice. Fair pay. Room and board. Nothing fancy. Just someone strong enough to do the work and smart enough not to get kicked in the head. He hadn't expected her. The wagon rattled through the gate just as thunder cracked across the ridge. An old mule hitched to a weathered cart, creaking up the dirt drive like it belonged there. Clay stepped off the porch into the wind, narrowing his eyes as it pulled to a stop near the barn. The driver climbed down and tipped his hat. Then she appeared. A woman. Barefoot. Dirty. Small. She stepped off the cart, steadying a child in her arms. Her dress looked like it had been stitched from a curtain and worn down to threads. Her boots, tied with twine, barely clung to her feet. Her hands, she noticed them first, were raw and dusted in flour, like she'd come straight from a kitchen fire. The child clung to her hip, face tucked under the brim of a sun-bleached bonnet. The woman lifted her chin and met his eyes. She didn't flinch. "Mr. Dawson?" Her voice was rough, like riverbed gravel. "I saw your notice. I've come for the milking job." Clay blinked, looked at the woman. The kid, back at her. She barely came up to his shoulder. "You came to milk cows?" he asked flatly. "Yes, sir. I may not look it, but I can work." She adjusted the child and stepped forward. "Name's Ella May. This here's my daughter Rosie. She's 5. We just came in from the hill country." Clay didn't speak. The wind answered for him, whipping her skirt and tugging at her bonnet strings. "I used to run a bakery," she continued. "I know how to make butter, cheese, sour cream, anything a cow gives, I can turn into something better. I haven't milked before, but I can learn." Clay folded his arms. "You ever muck a stall? Carry a full pail of milk in each hand? A cow weighs 1,200 pounds. You ready to get kicked?" "I've been kicked worse," she said softly. Silence cracked between them, louder than the thunder behind them. "She looks like she's about to fall over," a voice muttered behind Clay. He hadn't heard Roy step out. "That ain't no milker." Clay didn't answer. Rosie stirred, lifting her head. Big eyes, hollow but bright, peered out from under the bonnet. The kind of eyes that didn't beg, just watched. He recognized those eyes. Hadn't seen them in a mirror in years, but he knew the look. "I don't take kids in the barn," Clay said at last. "Too many risks." "She'll stay clear," Ella replied. "She knows how to be still." "Where would you sleep?" "Don't need much. A cot, a corner." Clay looked toward the tack room off the barn. Dusty, but dry. Then back at her. It wasn't logic that made the decision. It was something else. Something low in his chest. Something dangerous. "You get 1 week," he said. "Trial run. If you're more trouble than help, I send you on your way." Ella nodded once. "Fair. Roy'll show you the barn. Don't touch the cows without him. You can stay in the tack room until I figure out where to put you." He turned and walked toward the house as the storm cracked open behind him, rain drumming the porch roof like war. Behind him, a child's voice, soft and sure. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." He paused. didn't turn around. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't mind the sound of footsteps following him inside. Morning broke with the lowing of cows and the thick scent of hay soaked through from the night's storm. The sky had cleared, brushed with amber light rising over the distant hills. The barn at Dawson Ranch was already stirring when Ella stepped out of the tack room, hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly, half from the morning chill, half from the knot of uncertainty that had settled in her chest. Rosie was still asleep, curled beneath a patchwork quilt, breathing soft and even. Ella eased the door shut behind her and crossed the yard toward the dairy barn, her boots squishing in the wet earth. Ranch life didn't wait. Smoke curled from the bunkhouse chimney, and a rooster somewhere was already announcing its opinion on the day. At the barn, Roy was scooping feed into troughs, each motion practiced and precise. "You're late," he grunted without looking up. "Cows are like clocks. Don't wait for breakfast." "I came as fast as I could," Ella answered, brushing hay from her sleeve. "Wasn't a question." He nodded toward the far stall. "That's Bessie. You'll start with her." Ella followed his gaze. Bessie was massive, a broad Holstein with dark eyes and a tail that swished like it had a personal vendetta. "She's our top producer. Also our meanest. Figures Clay'd throw you to her first," Roy muttered. "You ever even touched a cow?" "No, sir," Ella replied. "But I've churned more butter than most men have coffee grounds." Roy snorted. "That won't help if she kicks your teeth in." "I don't plan to get that close," she said, managing a faint smile. "You'll have to." He handed her a stool and a metal pail. "Go on then. Let's see what you've got." Ella approached Bessie like she might approach a hot oven door. Cautious, focused. She murmured softly as she stepped inside the stall, not for the cow's benefit but for her own. "Hey there, girl. I'm not here to bother you," she said, placing the stool beside the massive creature. Bessie shifted her weight. Muscles rippled beneath her hide. "Just need your help. I'm new to this." Ella sat down, reached under, and wrapped her hand around the udder. The teat was warm, firmer than she expected. She squeezed too tightly, too suddenly. Milk sprayed weakly against the inside of the bucket, just a splatter. All wrong. Bessie twitched. Her back foot flew out, striking the stool clean off its legs. Ella fell backward with a gasp, one arm catching the ground, the pail clattering and spilling a sad quarter cup of milk into the hay. Roy leaned against the stall gate and shook his head. "You'll need more than sweet talk and soft hands," he said, stepping in. He took the stool, sat down, and adjusted the pail. 2 practiced tugs later, milk streamed out in clean, steady rhythm. The sound of it hitting the bucket was almost musical. Ella watched. Every finger movement, every pause, the way his thumb pinched and released, not yanking but coaxing. Roy stood. "Your turn, and this time, breathe." She sat again, hands steadier. She closed her eyes for just a moment and tried to remember how it felt to knead dough. Firm, but gentle. Repetition, patience. When she squeezed this time, the milk came slower, but it came. Bessie shifted, but didn't kick. 10 minutes passed. Her arms ached, her palms throbbed, but the bucket was half full. Not perfect, but not failure either. "Not awful," Roy muttered. "But don't let your guard down. Cows spook easy." Ella nodded, wiping her brow with the back of her sleeve. Outside, the barn doors opened wider. Clay stood in the sunlight, hat low, arms crossed. He said nothing, just watched. Ella didn't look up. She kept milking. A few minutes later, Rosie wandered in barefoot, a sleepy kitten following close behind. She plopped down near the hay bales, eyes wide with wonder, and hummed quietly to herself. Then, Bessie's tail lashed sideways. The pail tipped. Milk splashed across Ella's skirt, clanging against the rail. She didn't swear, didn't cry out. She closed her eyes, took one slow breath, stood, wiped her hands, and righted the bucket. Then she sat back down and started again. Some hands, kit before lunch, but not hers. Maybe she'd never milked a cow before, but those hands had fed a child, kneaded bread, and shaped survival from flour and fire. And maybe, just maybe, they could shape this place too. Do you think a baker's hands can outlast a Holstein's kick? If you believe in instincts, not just experience, you might want to keep watching. The story's only begun. The morning light filtered through the slats of the barn, soft and golden, casting long lines across the dusty floor. The cows moved with slow patience, their breath hanging in the cool air like steam from a kettle. Ella's arms ached from the milking, her hands stiff and marked with the beginnings of fresh blisters. But there was no time to linger in pain. She had cream to churn. Behind the barn, in a small side room near the wash basin, she had set aside the milk from the day before. The cream had risen thick and golden in the ceramic bowl, ready to be transformed. The churn was old, left forgotten in the corner, its wood darkened by time and weather, but it was solid. She wiped it down with care, checked the paddle for splinters, and poured in the cream. The work was steady, repetitive. Her arms burned with each push, each rotation of the dasher. The sound was subtle wood on cream, air shifting through the narrow mouth of the churn butt to her. It was music, a quiet song of purpose. Halfway through, Rosie wandered in, barefoot and bright-eyed, cradling a sleepy barn kitten against her chest. She sat cross-legged near the door, watching in silence for a while, before finally asking, "Why do you stir it so much?" Ella smiled through the effort. "I'm not stirring," she said. "I'm shaking the cream until it gives up its secrets." Rosie tilted her head, curious. "Like a riddle?" "Exactly like a riddle." 40 minutes passed before it happened. The shift, the moment where the cream broke. The pale yellow butter began to separate, clumping together at one side of the churn, leaving behind a thin buttermilk. Ella exhaled with quiet relief. She poured the contents into a bowl, rinsed the butter in cold water, and worked it gently with wooden paddles, shaping it into soft blocks. The scent filled the space rick, clean, familiar, like home, if home had ever smelled this sweet. She wrapped one block in clean cloth and set it aside. One for the ranch kitchen, one to keep. The rest she tucked into the cool storage below the barn floor, nestled against stone. Rosie helped where she could, handing cloth, naming each butter block like it was a pet. The kitten purred softly beside her. It felt, for a moment, like they belonged. Later, Clay stepped into the barn, quiet as ever. Ella didn't look up until he reached out, and she handed him the wrapped butter. He didn't say anything, just peeled back a corner, ran his thumb across the surface, and nodded once. "It's soft," he said. "Room temperature butter spreads better," she answered. Another nod. He turned and left. That evening, after supper, he passed her near the barn. No words, just a glance. Then he said, almost in passing, "Biscuits were better tonight." She didn't smile, not right away. But something warm bloomed in her chest. It was only day 3, but from a single bucket of milk, she had made something that people noticed, something that spoke louder than she ever could. From a churn and a pair of blistered hands, she had offered up something quiet and golden, and someone had listened. From one pail of milk, she shaped the kind of butter that made a kitchen go quiet. And this was only day 3. Tell Mito, you see it yet? That something is growing here, and it's not just cream. The morning was quiet, wrapped in a soft mist that clung to the grass and turned every breath into a secret. Ella stepped outside just after dawn, her apron still damp from rinsing butter cloths, and let her feet lead her past the barn, past the troughs, and out toward the far side of the property. That was when she saw it again, the low stone structure tucked into the curve of the land, half swallowed by weeds and ivy. The Butterhouse. She had noticed it once before, in passing, but now it called to her. Not loudly, just a whisper, like something wanting to be remembered. She walked slowly, brushing aside vines, careful not to disturb the quiet. The roof sagged in one corner. The door hung askew, but the bones were still their thick stone walls, a carved basin in the floor, rusted hooks lining the inside. It hadn't been used in years, maybe decades, but it was still breathing, still waiting. Rosie arrived a few minutes later, trailing 2 barn kittens and holding a piece of cornbread in her hand. "Is this a house?" she asked, peering in through the broken window. It was, Ella said. A Butterhouse. A place where milk stayed cool before folks had iceboxes. The spring behind it helped with that. Rosie giggled. Butterhouse sounds made up. It's real, Ella smiled. This place was built to turn cream into something good. The little girl stared around with wide eyes. Can we fix it? Ella looked at her hands scaloused, tired but capable. She didn't know how to raise a roof or lay stone, but she knew how to clean, how to restore, how to make do. Maybe, she said quietly, if someone lets us. That afternoon, after the milking and churning were done, she walked up to the porch where Clay was working leather on a saddle. I want to clean up the old dairy house, she said. He looked up, one brow raised. Why? Because it's still useful. The barn's too warm for cream. And right now I'm storing things under floorboards like it's bootleg. And when the roof caves in on you, I'll start with sweeping, she said. If it stays upright, we'll talk repairs. He stared at her for a long moment, not annoyed, just studying. You weren't hired to rebuild history. I wasn't hired to churn butter either, she replied. But I did. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. You break something, it's on you. I break things all the time, she said. I just don't leave them broken. That night, she and Rosie brought a lantern to the Butterhouse. They swept. They cleared glass. They stacked the shelves that hadn't yet crumbled. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone. When they lit the lantern and set it on the ledge, it cast soft shadows across the walls. It wasn't new, but it wasn't dead. 3 days later, while gathering kindling near the back wall, Ella's boot caught on something buried in the dirt. She crouched, brushed it off, and uncovered a brittle corner of canvas tucked beneath the stones. Slowly, she pulled it free. It was a map, old, yellowed, hand-drawn in ink that had nearly faded with time. Back inside, under the light of the lantern, she unrolled it across the Butterhouse table. It was a detailed sketch of the ranch, as it had once been fence lines, livestock zones, water paths. And near the bottom corner, in careful cursive, it read, Original Spring, 1873. Claim, the spring. The one still running behind the Butterhouse. And marked clearly, it was within the Dawson boundary. Ella stared at the initials beneath the note. T.L. Dawson, Clay's grandfather. She didn't know yet what it would mean, but it felt like more than history. It felt like protection. She didn't just churn cream, she stirred up something deeper, something this land had tucked away long ago. And the question was, who else had just felt it wake? Saturday came with a clear sky and a soft breeze that hinted at heat later in the day. Ella stood in front of the Butterhouse, her hands dusted with flour, inspecting the small basket she had packed. 4 blocks of herbed butter, 2 jars of buttermilk sealed with wax, and a tin of soft cheese. Not much, but enough to carry, enough to share. Rosie stood at her side, dressed in her cleanest clothes, a cloth rabbit tucked under one arm. Her excitement buzzed louder than the morning insects. When Roy pulled up the wagon, they climbed in without hesitation. Clay stood near the porch as they rolled out, arms crossed but watching. Hilltop Junction was no bustling city, but it had its rhythm. The general store clanged with the sound of the front bell. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Ella stepped off the wagon holding Rosie's hand and the basket tight. She made her way first to the mercantile. Mr. Barton, the store owner, eyed her with polite suspicion until she offered a slice of fresh bread spread with her butter. He chewed, paused, then took another bite. Well, I'll be, he said. You make this yourself? She nodded. Bring more next week. I'll trade you sugar or oats for it. At the bakery, Miss Lya tried a spoonful of the soft cheese, squinting in thought. Then she said, without fanfare, You come by Thursday mornings. 2 loaves for a jar this size. But if you water it down, don't bother coming back. Ella didn't promise. She just said, I wouldn't dare. By the time they returned to the wagon, the basket was empty. Rosie licked a peppermint stick, her face smeared with happiness. Ella's arms were lighter, but her chest was full. Clay met them near the corral. How'd it go? Ella said, Better than expected. Barton and Lya both want more next week. They offered to trade. Clay didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. That night, The ranch settled early. The wind was still, the sky dark and heavy. At some point between the hours, smoke crept through the pasture. Clay was the first to notice. A faint orange flicker behind the Butterhouse. When he ran down the hill, Roy, just behind him, the fire had caught one fence post and begun to lick the dry grass nearby. It hadn't spread far, stopped by the moisture from last week's rain. But the intention was clear. Someone had lit it. By morning, the smoke was gone, but the message remained. Blackened wood, a half-burned match left at the base of the fence. Clay crouched beside it, jaw clenched. Deliberate, he muttered. Ella stood nearby, arms tight across her chest. Her eyes moved across the damage, not a wildfire, not an accident. Clay looked at her, then at the Butterhouse behind her. You think it was Maddox? I don't think, she said quietly. I know. Creighton Maddox owned the ranch to the south. Known for cheap milk, cheaper labor, and a temper that bit harder than his dog's. If Ella's butter had found favor in town, it meant someone else's hadn't. Clay didn't say much after that, but that afternoon he rode into town with the map Ella had found. Roy went with him. They returned at dusk with a stamped copy of the deed revision, freshly notarized. The spring, the Butterhouse, the land around it, was all clearly within Dawson property lines. That map wasn't just history now, it was armor. Ella didn't sleep much that night. Neither did Clay. The fire hadn't taken the Butterhouse, but it had taken something quieter, the ease of a new beginning. What was left now had to be protected. When a man loses land, loses buyers, loses face, what does he have left? Ella didn't burn anyone's barn, but she had stirred something dangerous, and someone else had lit the match. The morning was too still. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Clay stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes locked on the southern ridge. A thin column of dust rose in the distance, cutting through the air like a warning. Riders. 3 of them. He didn't need to guess who. By the time they reached the front gate, Roy and Jesse were already near the barn, arms crossed, watching in silence. Ella stepped out from the Butterhouse, her apron still damp with cream. She looked once at Clay. He nodded. Once. Slow. Creighton Maddox dismounted first, his wide frame landing heavy in the dirt. He didn't bother with pleasantries. You think you're clever, he spat. Parading your dairy girl through town, stealing what's mine. Clay didn't move. That land's ours. So is the spring. County says so. Creighton sneered. You think some paper means anything? That Butterhouse was useless until she stirred it up. He turned to Ella then, eyes sharp and mean. And you think you're somebody now, girl? You think a few blocks of butter makes you untouchable? Ella didn't flinch. I think I make better butter than you, she said simply. Creighton took a step forward, his voice rising. You're a damn thief, you and your brat. Before he could finish, a small voice cut through the silence. Don't yell at my mama. Rosie had stepped forward from behind Ella, feet planted in the dust, her little hands balled into fists at her sides. Her face was pale, but her voice didn't shake. She works harder than you ever will. The silence that followed was thick, pressing in from all sides. Creighton stared at the child, then at Ella, then back at Clay. You let a woman and a brat speak for your ranch? Clay stepped forward, his voice low but hard as iron. No, he said. I speak for it, and I'm saying you're trespassing. You come back again. The sheriff will be waiting. Creighton looked around. Roy, Jesse. Even the ranch hands had stopped what they were doing. He spat once in the dirt, eyes dark with something worse than anger. Then he turned, mounted up, and rode off without another word. When the dust finally settled, Ella knelt and pulled Rosie close, whispering something only the girl could hear. Rosie nodded, eyes bright, mouth tight. Clay stood a few feet away, hands clenched, watching the road where Creighton had vanished. No shots were fired, no fists were thrown. But something had cracked wide open that morning. Not all battles need bullets. Sometimes they only need a mother who won't back down, and a child who knows exactly what she's standing up for. The day after the standoff passed without incident. No riders, no fire, just sun-soaked silence and the distant low of cattle. Ella rose early, same as always, to churn cream and wash linens, but something in the air had shifted. Not tension, not fear, just space. Room enough to breathe again. That afternoon, Clay found her near the Butterhouse, her hands busy shaping butter into neat, pale blocks. Rosie was nearby, humming as she played with twine and a kitten that refused to be named. Clay stepped into the doorway and held something out. A small iron key, rough-edged and warm from his palm. "I had Roy fix up the old bunkhouse room," he said. "New stove, clean walls, real windows." Ella looked at the key, then at him. "This for me?" "It's for both of you," Clay said, his voice quieter than usual. "No more tack room, no more borrowed corners." She took the key without speaking, her fingers closing around it like it might vanish. The next morning, the wagon rolled into town at first light. Clay wore his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled, hat pulled low. Ella sat beside him, her apron pressed and tidy, a basket of butter tucked between her feet. Rosie rode in the middle, holding her cloth rabbit with one hand and Clay's coat sleeve with the other. They set up beside the bakery, same spot as last week. This time, the basket carried more butter, more cheese, a few jars of chilled buttermilk, each package wrapped in cloth and labeled in red crayon, letters blocky and proud. Dawson butter. No one had told Rosie what to write, but no one had corrected her either. The market crowd came early, and they came hungry. The butter sold fast, the cheese went faster. Even the bakery customers asked where to find that churned stuff from the ranch. Ella didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her work spoke louder than she ever had. When the last jar left the table, Clay leaned close and said, almost offhand, "We should make more next week." Ella froze for just a beat, not at the idea, but at the word, "we." He said it like it had always been there, like it wasn't a line crossed, but a line forgotten. She didn't smile, not right away, but she looked at him, long and steady, and nodded. "It's a small word, that one. We, but sometimes it opens the door that stays open. Sometimes it builds the first real room in a house that never had space for two. From her, to them, to us. That's how something begins. And maybe, just maybe, it won't end this time." The ranch was quiet that evening, not in the way of emptiness, but in the way of something finally at rest. The kind of silence that came not from absence, but from safety. The cows had been fed, the buckets rinsed, the butter chilled and wrapped in cloth, and the sky, stretched wide above them, glowed with the soft blue of a day closing gently. Inside the new room Clay had fixed up for them, the stove crackled with low warmth. Rosie lay curled on the cot, her cloth rabbit tucked beneath her chin, one hand resting on Ella's skirt. The girl's breathing was deep, steady, untroubled. Ella sat at the small wooden table in the corner, her notebook open, a stub of pencil in hand. The pages were worn now, speckled with flour, dotted with smudges from butter and rain. She wrote slowly. "Day 10, he said we." Then she paused. Let the words settle into the page. Outside, a lantern swung on the porch. Clay sat on the steps, sipping from a chipped mug, boots crossed at the ankle, watching the last light fade over the hills. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Later, Ella joined him. She brought 2 slices of bread, still warm, and a small pat of the day's butter. He took one, nodded his thanks, and passed her the mug. They sat like that for a while, side by side. No words, no rush. The breeze moved around them, soft as breath, carrying the scent of cream, dust, and grass. Somewhere in the dark, a cow lowed once, then fell silent again. It didn't feel like the end of a story. It felt like the middle of one that might finally last. Behind them, the light from the room glowed steady. Not a flicker of doubt, just a low, steady flame. Ella looked up at the stars, then at the land, then at the man beside her. And she thought not for the first time, but maybe the first time without fear, that they could build something here. Not perfect, but present. She would churn more butter tomorrow, maybe bake something sweet. Rosie would name the barn cats again. Clay would ride the fence line. Life, for now, was still. And stillness, she had learned, didn't mean stuck. Sometimes it meant you'd finally stopped running. If you're still here, maybe you believe it too, that we don't need perfect to feel whole. We just need a place to belong, and someone to stand beside us. If this story touched something in you, let us know in the comments. Tell us which part you carried with you, because maybe, like Ella, you've been waiting for a little quiet that feels like home.